The wheels, the people and the road. Music and talk live on cruisefm.com.au.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We've got Scott Bartle. Scott Bartle is famous for a video that he released on YouTube regarding his troubles with customs in Western Australia while importing a 1958 Corvette. Scott, we really wanted to ask you some questions and tell us your story in person. How are you, mate?
Very good. Thanks, Alday.
One of the first questions, mate, that we really want to find out is, are you driving the Corvette now? Have you got it on the road?
Yeah. I ended up paying the extortion fee to customs, else they were going to crush the car or dispose of it. So rather than face a crushed car and still argue, I paid their extortion fee, and then at least I have taken their leverage away. So the saga continues, but I've got the car now.
We know all about car crushing here in Queensland and also in Western Australia, which they're talking about new powers of impoundment and the threat of crushing your vehicle. Mate, just quickly, your car, 1958 Corvette, it's a twin headlight model, but it's got a LS2, I believe, and an air conditioner as well.
Yeah, it's actually 59.
59, yep.
Yeah, it's had the new LS2 fitted, aircon, and that was probably the thing that pushed me over the edge when dealing with the import process. That was a mess.
Can you step us through what happened to you?
Yeah, well, I'd researched all the charges that were going to be levied. I knew that I was going to be paying insurance, shipping, GST, luxury car tax. I knew all of the things I was going to be paying. I had a customs broker assisting me, and when the car arrived and was in quarantine, they hit me with this new tax of this pre-charged equipment license. And I found that afterwards that a number of people found out about that license only once their car had landed. So basically they were held hostage to have to pay this license fee, or alternatively go pay for a mechanic to go and degas the car, only to regas it once it cleared their quarantine. So it shaped up just like a money grab. And that was the thing that pushed me over the edge to start questioning who these guys really were.
Not just the money grab, but utter stupidity from anyone's level of thinking. You've done something about it. You got upset enough to go and do some research, and you found some stuff which at the beginning may sound a bit crackpotty, but you don't think so.
Yeah, I agree. For a lot of people, this is a fairly new sort of concept, and yet I've probably been asking now these questions for about 2 years from various politicians, and have boiled it down to traces back to, in one instance, the office of the governor for each state, or the office of Governor-General at the Commonwealth level. Now, we've put these questions to these folk to validate their lawful standing and authority. And for now 2 years they have avoided providing evidence of their standing and authority. And that kind of leaves them without any standing and authority. Now, before you think, well, why should they have to ask? Why should they answer? Or their government? What do you mean? We came across a section within the Crimes Act of 1914, which was a brilliant piece of literature, and literally it says that any person shall be able to question or bring to the attention of government or the monarch. Let me see if I can find it for you, because it's really quite simple.
You have a website, and we can also find this?
Yeah, I haven't got this one up on the website yet.
Yeah.
I have converted this into a single-page questionnaire that can be used for so-called government. But basically it says, it shall be lawful for any person to point out in good faith errors or defects in the government or constitution of the United Kingdom or of any of the King's dominions or of the Commonwealth as by law established or in legislation or in the administration of justice with a view to reformation of such errors and defects. Yeah, so before you say, well, they don't have to answer or anything like that, there's a section in the legislation from 1914. Granted, that bit was added in 1920. It was an amendment. It says we can point out little errors or defects with a view to reforming those errors or defects. So it's basically us putting a hand up and saying, hey, excuse me, guys, you've missed out something here, or you're acting outside your authority there. Where's your badge? What oath are you working under? It gives us the grounds to be able to ask a few questions, basically. That's a good starting point for folk to know that there's right to put your hand up and ask a question.
Yeah, so you have the option, or you have the ability to ask questions of your government without any repercussions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's stated well and truly within the Crimes Act of 1914 that that's exactly what you can do.
One of the questions we got asked to ask you is in regards to fear. Not fear, or the question was, if you challenge the various levels of government, I can see them potentially making life difficult. Harassment, maybe. How would one prevent this if choosing to call them on their validity, especially if the current courts may not be valid?
Yep, that's a very good point, because they do make it very difficult for you if you choose not to pay. Take, for example, a parking ticket. I have one that I've pushed to the limit over here, where they've gone and engaged the Fines Enforcement Registry, which is the equivalent of the state
Spur.
penalties
Yep.
and Spur. They go and then talk to the Department of Transport, cancel your licence. They can take it through the court. Then the court can involve a debt collector to pay the fine, or the sheriff, sorry. So you end up with 5 or 6 different agencies, purported agencies, involved over a stupid $60 parking ticket.
That's right.
And the amount of paperwork that you can get involved in trying to get from them evidence that they're legitimate is just ridiculous. So what I've done recently is I've stopped worrying about seeking evidence that they're legitimate. I just know they aren't. What I do, however, is I make the payment under protest, and I make an offer that says, essentially, should it turn out that the office, that the standing and authority of your office derived from an unlawful office of governor, then I will be demanding restitution of the money that was paid, as in the fine, plus I'll be seeking damages in the amount of, say, 10,000 ounces of silver. And again, I use silver because that's what it says within the Constitution is the only thing that the states shall coin for the payment of debts. So silver sounds like the constitutional option.
Silver sounds like a payment of something instead of a paper note that might have a seal on it that is not legal.
Exactly, yeah. If you go look at, say, Larry Hannigan's website, I think larryhannigan.com.au maybe, it might be just .com.
They can use the search engine.
There is some, throw it into Google. He's got some brilliant information on there about the currency and how it really just is an IOU that's based on nothing. But in doing that, in making that payment under protest, you're taking the leverage away from them, but you're also putting the burden on them should their office derive from an unlawful office of governor. Now, along with that, I usually put a little diagram that shows the parallel office of governor. And I'm actually going to be rebuilding my website to include some of those diagrams so that you can actually download those and send them along with it, and potentially a questionnaire to some of these guys. That it really guides them step by step through the validation of their office.
Scott, sorry, I saw another video that you've put out, which goes through some diagrams of the split of the new constitution compared to the old. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. There's that's partially it. The diagrams that I'm talking about have got a little bit more advanced than that. In terms of their simplicity, it's just real basic stuff. I can go into a little bit of the detail on how that works if you like. Hopefully that'll help the listeners. Okay, so basically in 1900 the office of governor was constituted by Queen Victoria. Now, this happened in each of the states and also for the Governor-General for the Commonwealth. So the document that she used to constitute this office was the letters patent, dated 29th of October 1900. Now within there she said, look, I make permanent provision for the office of governor. Now the office is essentially what the office that the governor occupies, just in the same way as a judge is the office holder of the court, which would be the office. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, yep.
Okay, so back in 1900, Queen Victoria set up this office for governor, and she said, I make permanent provision for this office. Now, within there, she also specified what it would take to revoke that document, those letters patent. And she said, I reserve the power and authority to heirs and successors of myself to revoke these letters patent. So now that tells me that there's a specific process and a reservation of power and authority from 1900 as to how you revoke those letters patent. Now what we've got is a situation where in 1986, for I think most of the states, we've got another set of letters patent that purportedly revoked those original letters patent from 1900. Except, however, that the authority that they used to revoke those letters patent from 1900 was the Australia Act. I'm like, hang on a minute. That doesn't sound like it satisfied the reservation of power and authority from Queen Victoria in 1900. So all I've done is I've asked anyone in government to qualify and provide verified evidence that the revocation of those letters patent from 1900 was done in accordance with Queen Victoria's reservation of power and authority. If it wasn't, then surely the permanent provision that Queen Victoria set up is still in place and that office is still valid. Would that seem fair?
Yeah, well, there's something wrong.
So if you draw that diagrammatically, what you get is from 1900, this line that goes all the way through in a timeline sort of fashion, all the way through till now. That would represent the permanent office of governor for that state. Now what we've got is from 1986, we've got this parallel office that's drawn parallel to your timeline that you drew above. And the issue... Yeah, so if you've got these, you can imagine you've got these two lines on the paper, one going from 1900 through till now, and then another one starting in 1986 going through until now. So unless those letters patent of 1986 really did satisfy that reservation of power and authority from 1900 by Queen Victoria, and they really did do the revocation, then the original ones from 1900 are not revoked and they still exist. So what you've got is two offices of governor. And the one that all the acts and laws and appointments of judges and commissioners of police and commissioners for taxation and all the rest of that junk are deriving from this parallel office of governor. So the question really is to determine which office of governor is their authority coming from. Now, you'd think that it'd be a pretty simple sort of response. They'd be able to say, yes, certainly, the revocation in 1986 was in accordance with Queen Victoria's reservation of power and authority. Yes, of course it was. Now, I've been asking that question now for 2 years from each of the various states around Australia, and not one of them, of the pollies or the officers or the government, none of them will even go near that question. In fact, even the Governor of Western Australia wrote back to one person who wrote in and asked that question and said, "Your question has no legal or constitutional efficacy and I will not be answering it." Okay. Like, wow, that's a bit of a hostile reaction to that question.
You hit a raw nerve.
So one would think so. And so what I've been doing is the other approach to making payment is basically saying, well, look, I'll certainly make payment to your little fine or your little fee or your license or whatever, but could you please absolve me from any criminal liability should it turn out that your office derived from the office of a parallel office of government or governor? Because in that case, by you making payment to these guys, you're aiding and abetting their personation of a Commonwealth officer. And again, personating a Commonwealth officer is that'll get you up to 2 years imprisonment per the Crimes Act of 1914. So I've been saying, look, hey guys, I don't want to be committing any crime here. Can you please absolve me from any criminal liability by declaring that, yes, your office is fully legitimate, you take full responsibility for it, absolve me from any liability in the event that turns out you guys are a bunch of criminals.
Do you get a response with that?
Now, well, yet to put one of those ones in. This we only discussed this one with some friends just recently. Okay. Now, what it does, that's a little bit more confrontational. It really hammers the point that, well, to me, it's fairly legitimate. You're saying you don't want to commit a crime by aiding and abetting these guys who are unable to demonstrate their standing and authority. Now, of those two methods, obviously making the payment under duress or under protest is a lot easier to do and doesn't involve anyone sort of coming after you because you've paid their little extortion fee. But either way, what I'd say is the key is really to just be discussing this information with people that you run into. Even go and talk to your local representative. They may reject you, they may not. I'm finding there's a lot more folk in politics who are actually open to at least discussing this.
Oh, really?
The suggestion really is, in bringing this information up, is really keep it simple. Unless you really have a good grasp of the subject, keep it real simple. Like, for example, you could ask your school teacher, I see you're teaching my child about the Australian government. Would you be able to show me what page of the Constitution of 1900 that the Australian government features on? Because when I read it, I couldn't actually find it. And I wouldn't want you to be teaching my child something that wasn't lawful, because that'd ruin our day, wouldn't it?
You know what? I've had an opportunity to talk to people studying law, and they are under the full impression that they are working and studying the correct constitution and law. They point to the latest patent of the 80s. And
86?
86, yep. and say, well, it happened. The Queen was there. They remember the picture with Bob Hawke and the Queen signing the paperwork. So, in the current system, people think the latest patent have happened.
Well, here's a couple of good ones we can ask those law students, because law is based on facts, right? Yes. So we want to know, first off, it's rather interesting that those letters patent of 1986, this is the Commonwealth level ones, when you sign a legal document, do you sign it with your nickname or do you sign it with your full legal name? For example, if your name's Robert J. Hawke or Robert John Hawke, do you sign it Bob or do you sign it Robert J. or Robert John Hawke?
Well, if you
what would you do?
Especially if you're a Prime Minister, you'd be putting your full name, including your letters, your PM or whatever the official letters for Prime Minister are.
You'd think so. Anyway, these letters patent of 1986 have got Bob written on it. So
okay, I've got to chase
he's
it up
got his
now.
nickname down there. I can send you a copy if you like.
Please do, yeah, and I'll post it.
Sorry?
Please do, and I'll put it on my website as well.
Okay. Now, the other interesting one that those purported letters patent of 1986 state is they say, we do hereby revoke the letters patent of dated 29th of October 1900 as amended. Now, the question is, did they revoke or purport to revoke the original unamended set of letters patent of 1900, or are they saying that they revoked an amended set of letters patent from 1900? How would you
there is a difference.
interpret?
There is a difference there. What are the amended paperwork they're talking about?
Well, that's the question. Because if by reading that statement within those 1984 letters patent, you come to the conclusion, as I do, that they're talking about an amended set of letters patent, then somewhere in the timeline from 1900 to 1984 would exist a set of amended letters patent. Now, what if there was no such letters patent and amended set somewhere between 1900 and 1984? What if you couldn't find those in the archives? Which real letters patent did they really revoke?
Okay. All right. Well, and obviously you've dug deep and not found those missing or amended patent letters anyway.
No. And again, the same thing, the same question applies. Is you can put these letters patent from 1984 under my nose, and they say they're passed under the Great Seal of Australia. Now, to my knowledge, that office of Governor-General is the office of the representative of the monarch. Now, if you want an example of a proper revocation, in 1925, in Queensland, they revoked the original 1900 letters patent because they wanted to add some more islands to the geographical description of Queensland. And so what they did was they said, under the Great Seal of the United Kingdom, here's a new set of letters patent. So that tells me that you use the seal of the United Kingdom to do the revocation and to pass the new letters patent, because we're really talking here about the office of a representative of the Queen. Now, until the Queen starts using the Australian seal to make officers of her sort of authority, you think there's something going on here?
Mate, look, there's something going on is definitely there. The unfortunate thing is that you've had the opportunity to have a look deeper into it. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is to point me and possibly many of our listeners to look into it as much as they can or as deep as they can. I did get a question that someone wanted to ask you, and it says, does the Statute of Westminster of 1931 affect the validity of the original patent letters or letters patent in any way? There's a bit of an excerpt. It says, the Statute of Westminster 1931 is an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom, and identical but separate versions of it are now domestic law within each of the other Commonwealth realms, to the extent that they have not been implicitly repealed by subsequent laws. Passed on 11th of December 1931, the Act establishes legislative equality for the self-governing dominions of the British Empire with the United Kingdom, thereby making the effective legislative independence of these countries either immediately or upon ratification. The Statute of Westminster's relevance today is that it sets the basis for the continuing relationship between the Commonwealth.
Right. So there's a few things that come up with that, and that's not necessarily my area of expertise. However, my questions would be, for example, there's a lot of talk that Australia is a independent nation. Now, as an independent nation, you wouldn't need a Queen's representative, I'd imagine, because you'd be independent. And so you wouldn't need this Queen's representative.
Governor.
So there's two issues there. The other thing is, for example, the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia is an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom from 1900. Now, if Australia were again a independent nation, then there would be no need for that act to constitute the Commonwealth of Australia. So in that case, that act would have no necessity, and it could be repealed. And particularly if we were independent, then we would create a document, say like a Bill of Rights or something along those lines, to run as an independent nation, or vote on a entirely independent constitution. Now, to my knowledge, none of those things have happened.
Okay.
So back on that Statute of Westminster, I don't believe it affects the original letters patent, again, in as much as that reservation of power and authority that was reserved by Queen Victoria set that office of Governor-General, and for each of the states the Governor up, permanent, for permanent provision for that office, unless it was revoked, altered or amended by an heir and successor.
Which hasn't
So
happened.
if at the time of Westminster Act they had the opportunity to revoke it. Now, if they didn't, then to me it tells me that that office of Governor or Governor-General is still there.
David Flanagan says, for those interested, I found a YouTube video showing the 1984 latest letters patent supposedly invalid. Interestingly, pause the video at 5 seconds and there is a notice, edit Australia Act 1986, showing the original coat of arms. What's that about? Would Scott know? So there is a Australia Act 1986 showing the original coat of arms. Have you seen that before?
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah. So the coat of arms is the kangaroo and the emu.
Yes.
And it was originally granted to Australia back in 1908.
Yep.
And then again in 1912 with an updated version.
Yep.
Now that's your coat of arms. That's for use in Australia.
Yes.
Now, a lot of people say, well, the Australian coat of arms has been around since 1912.
Yes.
So what are you complaining about? That there's no lion and unicorn? They go, okay, really? So what if I found an example of the Queen using the Great Seal of the United Kingdom, the lion and the unicorn,
Yes.
at a date after 1912? What if I showed you an example of the Queen using her seal to, let's say, constitute an office of Governor? Would that kind of cement the idea that that's the seal used by the Queen?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, that makes sense. So 1925 in Queensland,
Yep.
letters patent were, I think I gave you the example.
Yes.
They updated the geographical description of Queensland, added in a couple of more islands, and reissued letters patent under the Great Seal of the United Kingdom.
The lion.
That's a full 13 years after the coat of arms were granted for Australia. And yet here's the king, I think at the time, using the Great Seal of the United Kingdom to constitute the office of the governor.
Yep. Actually,
which makes sense because
this guy is talking about the lion and the unicorn being on a notice called Australia Act 1986 with the lion and the unicorn on it.
Okay, so that would be the UK version.
It may be, that's right. Yeah, because I had a quick look at the video and they did speak about the UK.
What they did was they took over the Australia Act was originally an act that was put to the UK. Now there's guys in Queensland, I think Dick Yardley, if you've heard of him.
Yes.
He pulled apart the differences between the UK Australia Act and the present version of the Australia Act. It's different.
Yes.
So they might be able to say, oh, but it was signed by the UK. Yeah, a different version. There's subtle changes.
All right, no.
Now, you can't really do that. That's not on. But these guys have, since 1973, operated the Parliament of Australia. The Constitution defines the Parliament of the Commonwealth. So, say, for example, they took a bill over to the UK and said, oh, here, we'd like you to sign this. It's come from the Parliament of Australia. We'd like you to sign this, please. Yeah, no problem. Here's the signature. Because it came from the Parliament of Australia, does that not make it illegitimate straight away?
Yeah.
There's so many levels of dodginess that's been going on.
Yep.
And that's what I found is folk will point at one thing and say, oh, look, see, it says in the 1986 letters patent, 84, that they revoked the 1900 letters patent as amended. And they'll skip past that little bit and go, see, it must be revoked. And they don't actually ask the detailed questions of, well, okay, did it satisfy the reservation of power and authority for revocation?
Yep.
Or are you just taking them on face value? And that's what we've been doing. We've taken everything on face value and we haven't asked the hard questions.
Yep. Okay. Australia, or the Commonwealth of Australia, is a company.
Well, the way I express it is I don't say the Commonwealth of Australia is a company. The way I say it is there is a company called the Commonwealth of Australia registered in Washington, D.C. Now, the reason I say that is because I believe that there's still the original Commonwealth that's comprised of the people,
us,
and that you can't take that away, particularly when in the first paragraph of the Constitution of 1900, it stated, whereas the people, I think, unite in one indissoluble federal commonwealth. So indissoluble says it's not able to be dissolved. Now, the fact that there is a company called the Commonwealth of Australia, registered in Washington, D.C., and in fact, actually, there is multiple Commonwealths registered over there. And I'll send you a document which has got the various different Commonwealths. For example, there's 3 of them registered at that Washington address, which are very similar in name, but they're all got separate Dun and Bradstreet company identification numbers. One of them is a real doozy. It's actually the Australia Commonwealth of Inc. It's an absolute classic. So it's a bit hard to sort of argue that that's not a corporation. And most of these things have got trading names as trading as, or in the States they call it doing business as the Australian Trade Commission, or doing business as the Consulate General of Australia, or the Australian Embassy. But the common thread is they're all, you can look them up on company registers, they're all companies, which means to me they're governed by the rules of that company registry. If you registered a company in Australia under ASIC, you follow their rules. Now, interestingly enough, I don't see on the Australian ASIC registry the United States as a registered company here in Australia. I don't see the Italian embassy registered here in Australia as a company.
So they can do business, but they're not there.
Yeah, seemingly not. So unless they're behind the scenes that we haven't come across yet, but you would think if that was the argument, you need to be a company registered over there to be an embassy, but then again you think, hang on, embassies are supposed to be sovereign territory. You see these movies where people go running down the street in behind the gates of the embassy, and they're now back on US territory. It's a ship. The soldiers, when they come from their duty ashore, they step back on board that ship. They're back on the territory of the flag that ship is flying.
That's correct.
It's a little piece of that country that's mobile. And that's my understanding of an embassy. It's the little mobile piece of that country. So to say it needs to be a corporation doesn't add up.
Does the government need to have an ABN number in Australia? I was asking a person that works in a government department in Queensland, and I said, why have you got an ABN, or are you a company sending me mail with X written on it and then charge me GST? And the people were saying, it's all to do with accounting and GST and all that. Have you come across that?
So, yeah. See, a government paying tax to itself seems pretty logical, doesn't it?
Not really.
Not really.
No. The way I see a government, and I come from a position of not giving a shit about government about a year ago, to now looking at what's happening in my future and my family's future, and discovering all these things which do not seem right. There is a right and there is a wrong, which you can instinctively look at, and that does not just feel right or look right.
No. Well, it gets a little bit more interesting. I'll just send you a link to, there's a little search tool that's on the Dun & Bradstreet website here in Australia. And once you've got the ABN number for these purported departments, you can actually throw that ABN number into this search tool, and it will find the Dun & Bradstreet DUNS number, which is a unique identifier for a company. Now, a German friend of mine has actually got it in writing, unfortunately in German, from the Dun & Bradstreet office in Germany, that they only register companies. So, I mean, it's a bit hard to avoid the unfortunate conclusion that all of these so-called departments, if they're flying the flag of an ABN number, an Australian business number, mind you, and a Dun & Bradstreet company number, you'd think, in their infinite wisdom, if they really wanted to differentiate themselves between government and business, they would have a unique identifier. I mean, this ABN thing only came in what, 2000?
It wasn't that long.
How hard would, if it was only for taxation purposes and accounting, to set up something like that, why not have a AGN, Australian government number? I mean, how hard would that be? But no, they're all business numbers.
Okay, Scott.
And the fact,
here's a question.
Yeah, sorry.
It's government. Okay, they got a business number. We own the company. Is that right? We own the government, don't we?
This is what this took me a long time to sort of get through my head. Was I kept expecting these guys to be public servants. I kept expecting them to have to respond to me as if they were a public servant. Now, I can point them at the Crimes Act and say, look, here's my right to be able to ask it. But if they're just a company and they report to shareholders from another country, what obligation really do they have to respond to me as a member of the public?
Okay.
None.
They wouldn't, but if this Commonwealth of Australia company has got shareholders, who are the shareholders?
Now, funny you say that. We've been trying to track this down for a very, very long time. I just received an email from someone in the UK who said way back to, this is when they first started looking into this ownership aspect. They saw the owner of the Commonwealth on the Securities Exchange Commission website way back, but it's been removed. We've since written to the Securities Exchange Commission asking for that information, and it's not forthcoming. Likewise, Dun & Bradstreet won't actually release their credit reports for these so-called government departments. So we're being blocked in terms of finding out who actually owns it at this stage.
Could it be that some unknown person in the US, for example, sitting in his garage, decided one day to open a company called the Commonwealth of Australia, and it's got nothing to do with Australia as we know it? Has it got funds going into it that's directly coming from Australian Treasury, or are the funds coming in from somewhere else and it's got nothing to do with Australia in itself?
Yeah, for example, if you look at some of the filings on that Securities Exchange Commission, you've actually got the budget, the Australian budget.
Okay.
So it shows all the tax collected and that sort of thing.
So there's a link to Australian accounting. So the tax I pay.
There's even sorry.
The tax I pay to the Commonwealth of Australia, or the ATO as I know it, is in that budget report that's in that Commonwealth of Australia company in the US. So it's not a totally disconnected entity to what we know. So like you're saying, they got the budget, Australian budget, as part of the money that that company owns.
I don't think it's as easy as that. It is in terms of you see that report. However, for example, what we found as well is when you pay your tax to the ATO, who do you write the actual check out to?
I think it's a commissioner, isn't it? Commissioner of Taxation?
Yeah. What if I said that the Commissioner for Taxation was actually a registered entity itself and not a position title?
Isn't the Commissioner of Taxation supposed to be the office holder of the taxation department?
Yeah, you would think he's an officer, as in that's his position title. However, I'm looking at right now, I have, what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 10 registered entities. There's actually more that are from, this is a printout from the ASIC Securities Register. The Commissioner of Taxation is a registered entity with the number 081222175. Then there's the Australian Commissioner of Taxation. Then there's about 8 Deputy Commissioners of Taxation, all with registered numbers. I believe these have been removed from the search feature of the ASIC now.
Yep.
But yeah, all of these things are showing up as registered entities, not the position title that we believe they are.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to get that much?
So when you write that to the Commissioner of Taxation, where does it go from there? You think you're paying the ATO, but if you're paying a company called the Commissioner of Taxation,
our money is going into a company, whereas we're thinking that it's being spent on we, the people, on getting our roads fixed, getting our hospitals equipped.
Yep.
I mean, there is a bit of money being spent on that, but
Well, it would appear that a lot of that money is spent to give the appearance of keeping the country going. I mean, the way I see it is the wheels fell off this country when they stopped printing money through the Treasury or the Commonwealth Bank. There are examples in history where projects were funded from the Commonwealth Bank interest-free without it being a loan. For example, I think the Commonwealth Railways, the Snowy Mountain Water Scheme, some projects that were funded through the Commonwealth Bank. Now, the instant the Treasury ceased printing its money like that for those projects and spending it into the community, and they started borrowing from private banks, is the instant they needed taxpayers to actually repay those private banks. Does that make sense?
okay, yeah. So,
So,
the money
for
got,
example, the Income Assessment Act only came along in 1936. However, did we survive until then?
okay, no, well, now you got me set into looking into the history of taxation now. But no, it's interesting.
Well, here's
So,
the thing. If we didn't need to repay private banks and your Treasury printed the money into projects, and remember that the money that gets spent on these projects, like bridges and roads and that, is backed really by the energy and effort expended by the individuals building those roads. It belongs to the community. It's the community's money. What right does a private banker have to create money out of thin air, lend it to government, and then have taxpayers work their asses off to repay or to pay taxes to pay back to a private banker? And then it gets worse because the interest that that banker demands in return wasn't even spent into the economy, wasn't able to be earned by the tax, who couldn't pay it back as tax, and therefore it would never be able to be paid back to those private bankers. So the way that bubble keeps going is it gets bigger and bigger and more debt, which is just what we're seeing in the States.
that's right.
And what I believe happened is that ultimately the country went bankrupt, and that what we've got, these corporate commonwealths that we're seeing at the moment, are simply an administrator of a bankrupt country as a result of borrowing from private banks.
So you're saying Australia or Commonwealth of Australia Inc. is bankrupt, or the company registered?
Yeah, I'm saying they're acting as an administrator or a receiver or a liquidator, if you like, and that their sole job is to make as much money as possible for the private banks to pay them back the money that they loaned the government.
Mate, this is weeder and weeder as we go along. We need to get set people listening to this, looking into it and finding out, is there anything else we can look at or get our teeth in? I'll publish all those links you send me on my website anyway, for people to start doing a bit of research. But is there anything else we can have a look at?
Well, there's the other one is banking. Now that's a rabbit hole in its own, but there's some fascinating information coming out. There's some quotes from the IMF, Bank of England, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Chicago, Dallas, and Cleveland. And they're literally saying that when you go along for a loan, banks deposit your application form essentially as cash. And they get hold of that cash and use that money to loan back to you.
Hang on a minute. So banks have money, don't they? Banks have got a vault at the back of their the office somewhere that's encased in concrete and steel, and there's money there. Isn't that the money they use to lend to your account, which you then pass on to the other bloke? For example, if you're buying a car, isn't that the way it works?
That's what we're taught at school. We're taught that at school. However, what if I said even in the Corporations Act there's 3 ways of providing finance? And that of those 3 ways of providing finance, only one of them involves lending.
Really?
That tells me that there's 2 ways of providing finance that don't require repayment. Would you want to find out if the method that finance was provided to you, whether it be for your car or your house, was by lending or whether it was by the other 2 methods of providing finance? Would that pique your curiosity?
Yeah, well, we assume it's lending because you're going for a loan, and that's what I mean. Didn't read the full contract that I was signing when I went for a loan from my house, for example. But
well, here's where it gets really dodgy here, because the test I would use to determine whether a loan took place is you would need to own that money that was loaned. Like if I wanted to borrow a screwdriver to fix my timing light or whatever on my car, you would need to have that screwdriver to start with, right?
Yes. So you come to me and I'll give you the screwdriver, you use it, and you pay back or give it back.
And I give it back to you, and I give you a 6-pack or whatever for thank you very much. Now, let's just say we went down to the bank and said, look, I hear there's 3 ways of providing finance, and one of them is providing lending money. Now, for me, I'd like to test whether lending occurred by asking for evidence that you actually owned the money, that you had prior rights, title and ownership to the money that you lent me. Because that way I can be assured that you owned the money that you made available to me, that it really was a loan.
But,
because if, for example... Sorry?
I was going to say, Scott, we hear about the Reserve Bank lifting and lowering, the base interest rates because the banks need to go and get that money out of the Reserve Bank, I assume, so they can have it to then on lend. So what I'm assuming is that the Reserve Bank of Australia as a deposit of value, gold, let's say, I hope, and they'll say, I want to use this money, give it to me so I can lend it out, and then I'll pay you back at whatever interest rates, which is around the 2.5, I think, for the Reserve Bank, and then they lend it out at 7.
Yep.
So that's where the money's coming from, isn't it?
It all sounds logical, sounds fair, and makes sense. What if I said we came across 4 documents for each of the 4 big banks of Australia, Westpac, ANZ, NAB and Commonwealth, that showed the Federal Reserve Bank of New York had a registered security interest in essentially all of the assets of each of those banks from now and to perpetuity.
So basically, the banks owe money to someone else.
The Federal Reserve Bank of New York,
which has
to
got
the
gold.
value of
Everything.
See, for example, if you go and let's just take a typical example where you go and get a car loan, and let's just assume that it is a loan for the moment.
Yep.
You go down, you get a loan, and you say, okay, I want to borrow some money, and they go, yep, sure, we're going to register a security interest with the Personal Property Securities Register, and we're going to register this security interest over your car, the collateral, until you've repaid us this money. So you have an obligation to the bank to repay that money, and they have a security interest in the collateral, being your car, to the value equivalent to the obligation. That sound reasonable so far?
That's the way it works, I think.
Okay. Now, so when we look at the same document where the Federal Reserve Bank of New York has a registered security interest in the collateral of, say, ANZ, and the size of this security interest is everything that ANZ bank owns now and in the future or will earn, then your first question is, what is the size of the obligation that the ANZ has to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York?
What do they own?
One,
Or what will they ever own?
one would suggest monumental-sized obligation. Now, your next question is that obligation reported to the shareholders? And if that company, the ANZ, went bankrupt, who would have first right of call to the assets of the bank? Would the shareholders get first pick, or would the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, being the secured creditor or the secured party? See, all those shareholders are unsecured lenders, if you like.
Yes, investors, yeah.
So shareholders are going to play second fiddle to the Reserve Bank of New York, and they don't even know about it. So, and there's two sides to this. One is that it ties your big banks in Australia back to the lending practices of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So all the quotations and the money creation principles and policies that apply and are reported by those reserve banks in the US trickle all the way down to Australia. So when they go and report that we exchange a so-called borrower's promissory note in exchange for cash, that is, they deposit your application form as cash and then make that available to you as a loan, then you can start to see that there's some really dodgy stuff going on.
Now,
and the study of that is quite involved. It's not a simple one to get your head around because, like you said, I mean, our idea of money is we associate money with the 40 or 50 hours a week that you go and work your ass off.
That's right.
To earn. So when someone comes and says you borrowed money from a bank, the instant reaction is, well, yeah, you got to repay it.
That's right.
But if they've just typed those numbers into a computer out of thin air, then what right do they have to get 25 years worth of your labour and energy out of you for making those payments?
Just let me get
you
this
might
right.
say, okay.
If you don't mind, Scott, sorry. So I go to the bank to get a loan, and the minute I put an application in, or they approve an application, they view that application as a promissory note. What do I know about a promissory? It's like an IOU, is that right? It's like me saying to you,
Yep.
Give me some money, and here's a note that says I'll pay you back, IOU. So what you're saying is when I give them an IOU, they give me the money, but they don't actually give me the money or pay that money to the people I'm buying something from. They actually create numbers rather than money based on the promissory note or that IOU.
Yep.
Is that? But
Yep.
what about?
Let's
Okay, well that's too weird, mate. That's too bloody weird. So basically,
let's go with let's go back to that Corporations Act of those three ways of providing finance. As I said, the first one was lending money. Oh, let me read out this one and see what you make of that. Drawing, accepting, endorsing, negotiating, or discounting a bill of exchange, check, payment order, or promissory note so that someone can obtain funds. That's straight out of the Corporations Act. So if you're the bank, can you accept a promissory note so that someone can obtain funds?
Well, you shouldn't be able to.
Right. That's what it's saying in their own acts. So, I mean, this is what's happening is we all believe it's lending. Now, what if, for example, it wasn't lending? It was the third way of providing finance. Would you really want to be repaying that?
Well, yeah. Well, it's like you coming to me for the screwdriver, but what you do is you actually come with a picture of a screwdriver. You give me the picture, and I go at the back and make a screwdriver and give it to you.
Well, no, actually.
No?
What you do is because we're based on this fiat currency, this paper nothing. You give me the IOU and say, there you go. There's your screwdriver. Now, that's absolutely useless to me. Now, compare this to if we were on the gold standard. If we were literally using gold and silver as currency,
Yes.
that gold would need to exist. You couldn't tap into a computer how many ounces of gold. You just couldn't do it.
That's right. I'd go for a loan, an application. You go to the bank, you get a bar of gold, you give to me, and then I would give it to someone else in exchange for whatever goods I wanted.
And there's no amount of explaining that you could get out of that, because it existed first and it was lent to you and you repay it. But if you go along there with, now that we're talking about fiat currency, and we've been off this gold standard now for how many years, and we're dealing in these ones and zeros and these fake bits of money, derivatives and all of that junk.
Which can
can
rise and fall on some line, on some computer, which people can draw on and live that know the system, whereas me and you can't.
Yep, exactly. Now, just for a little bit of extra certainty in what we're talking about here, we go look at the Banking Act of 1959, and it says Australian currency includes notes, coins, postal notes, money orders, bills of exchange, promissory notes, drafts, letters of credits, blah, blah, blah. So there it is there again in the Banking Act that says promissory notes are Australian currency.
Can I go to the bank tomorrow and bring them my an IOU written on my paper from my computer and say to them, can I exchange this, or can I cash in this promissory note?
You would think so. And there's a woman actually in New Zealand right at this moment who is going through this activity right now. And what she did, this is about 2 weeks ago, she went in there with documentation and said, I would like to deposit some value using this sort of format.
Promissory note. Yeah.
And she wrote to the Minister for Finance, the Minister for this. She wrote to like about 15 or so characters in the banking industry and associated sort of departments to advise them what she was going to do. Nothing, no response. So she goes in there and cashes this $15 million worth of deposit using their sort of paperwork. And next thing, she's arrested for fraud. Now, you go, hang on a minute. Here's your own paperwork. Now, granted, this is Australia and New Zealand.
Yes.
It'd be slightly different, but I'd suggest they're very, very similar, in as much as Australia and New Zealand Bank is a bit of a giveaway that it's the same thing.
The linked, yeah.
So there she goes and follows their own rules. But when we do it, it's fraud. But if the bank does it and attaches a 25-year slavery contract onto the end of it, it's fine. So what unfortunately what this has done is it sparked a bit of a storm of folk going, hang on a minute, she's doing what you're saying is legal. Notice I said legal, not lawful. And we're just following these instructions, and you're saying it's fraud. Does that mean your entire system is fraud? Once you've finished arresting her, go and arrest the rest of the bankers in New Zealand.
So basically,
and it's put
the fraud that
these guys into.
Sorry, mate.
Sorry?
Good old Skype gets in the way all the time. I was going to say, she used a promissory note, which is regarded to be a legal tender, and she got done for fraud. But that's what happens in the banking system anyway, and they're not getting done for fraud.
Yeah, exactly. So she's. I mean, the terminology and the paperwork of what she actually used, I haven't seen. So sure. I'm only relaying someone else's account of it.
I'm going to look it up.
Yeah, she was essentially following their rules to deposit value according to those sort of things of providing finance, and she gets done for fraud. But the interesting thing is basically if they pin that on her, then they've got to go around and arrest all the bankers because they're doing the same thing. Just they're not disclosing what they're doing.
Are these promissory notes legal tender with other companies? Could I go to McDonald's and do a promissory note and buy a Big Mac?
I would say what you would encounter there is the unfamiliarity aspect of it. Yes, you might be able to tick the box of matching the Banking Act and that sort of thing. However, because it's not commonly used and circulated, they'd laugh you out of the bank, out of McDonald's.
Could I use that
And so,
for a government department when I pay my taxes?
you'd think so, because we're really just using this fiat, bloody Ponzi sort of money system. So there's a group of us actually at the moment researching further into going down to your bank and depositing value, because really the ultimate source of value comes from the energy and effort expended by us as humans doing stuff. It doesn't come from pushing a button on the computer and out spits a couple of $100 bills. That's not value.
Yeah, well, basically, when you mentioned like the Snowy Mountain scheme, the value there would have been the actual building of the dam and all the people that actually, the people working on that were creating the value in that in that physical product.
Yep. And you could never get inflation because you'd only be spending as much as you needed to build your dam or your road or your bridge. And you'd have as much money circulating in the economy as you had backed by these assets built by the energy and effort expended by the people. Does that make sense?
But obviously needs a bit deeper looking into. So in essence, we know, like instinctively, and most people listening to this will know that there are problems with the banking system, or there are problems with countries going under. Like you can see in Cyprus and in Greece, where people are going bankrupt. How can a country go bankrupt?
Did you hear recently about the city of Detroit going bankrupt?
That's right, yep. That upset a lot of car enthusiasts because that for many years has been the motor city that has built some of the wonderful machines that we all know and love.
Exactly. Well, I'd suggest going to a website called manta.com, MANTA.com, and go throw in, say, City of Detroit, and see how many different varieties of company you'll find of so-called government departments pretending to be government. It's hilarious. I mean, it's disgusting in one way, and yet it's very revealing in another. I see some of these sort of things like that money grab in Cyprus and the proposed, they want to do the same thing in Australia apparently. In many ways I see it as a way of sparking folk to actually get off their asses and go, hang on, nah, enough's enough, guys. This is just ridiculous.
Yep.
So at the moment there's a lot of Aussies who are sitting there comfortable, might not be too comfortable, but they're sitting there and they're not doing anything as yet. And I suspect that it will take a few more of these stupid sort of acts coming in where it finally starts to hit them in their back pocket and they go, oh, actually, maybe I should ask a few questions and start doing something about this.
Well, one of the things that prompted me to call you is the fact that you had your issues with your car, and we talked to a lot of car enthusiasts who have issues currently with state governments mainly, saying to them that they are giving themselves the power to be able to take your personal property. If you do what they deem to be an illegal act or a dangerous or in the name of safety, for example, if your exhaust system is too loud, I don't know if you had to go through any exhaust system testing with your Corvette, Scott, but if your exhaust system is too loud and they'll put a value on it of decibels that they come up with, they will deem that to be a an act that can give, especially in Queensland, the power to confiscate your car for 3 months. So if your car is too noisy, they can take your car for 3 months. Now, we didn't want them to have that power. We even made submissions to the state government saying that we didn't want that. But the laws got passed anyway. And the simple answer from many of the government departments is if you're doing nothing wrong, you've got nothing to worry about. Now, what's going on, Scott?
Well, basically, the way I see it is your governments that you're talking about at the moment are not government. And that's why I've focused a lot of my efforts on determining who they really are, what their lawful standing and authority is. If they turn out to have no standing and authority, there's the provisions of the Crimes Act for the personation of Commonwealth officers that would see them locked up for 2 years. However, because there's just no real government left anymore, including the courts, including the police, they used to be the police force, now they're the police service. There's a brilliant one in Victoria. We've got the Victoria Police, which is actually trading as, let's see if I can find that one. Here we go. Yeah, Police Department Victoria, trading as Victoria Police. Australian business number 63446, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be able to put that one into the Dun and Bradstreet search and go and find the Duns number for it as well. So, I mean, all of these guys are now just corporations.
So if we say...
so they're not...
Sorry, mate. If we say instinctively that there are fines, the speed limit or the speed cameras and there are laws on impoundment are basically a way to collect money for them, which is what we all think is happening, we're not too far from the truth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's getting more and more blatant. I mean, the guys I'm sure that you're talking to will be able to give you so many examples where it essentially has got nothing to do with safety or nothing to do with public facilities or that sort of thing. It will get pretty obvious that these are money grabs.
We know that now. We know that now.
You've got the old adage, follow the money.
Yeah, no, we know that now. We know it's revenue raising. You know, we can feel it. We can understand it. But they always tell us it's not.
No.
What I want to know is if in Victoria, for example, if they are a company or a police officer is an employee, like he will be an employee of McDonald's, for example, does it really have the power to give you a fine and tell you to pay it? Or, you know, like the system. Like, I've got a company, I run a small company. Can I send a letter to my next door neighbour and say to him, I don't like your tree, and here's a fine for the tree dropping too many leaves, and pay me this fine? Can I do that as a company?
What you would do is, rather than a fine, you would offer them terms and conditions and specify a way for him to accept those terms, for example, by not doing anything or trimming his tree. And then if those leaves did fall on the ground, you'd say, oh, thank you, you've just accepted terms, here's your invoice. Now, again, when you view all of these so-called departments as just companies, what's going on at the moment is an offer and acceptance kind of scenario where it's all corporate. So, for example, when you're pulled over on the side of the road, they want to know your name. Now, have you had much to do with the straw man and the capitalised name side of things?
I've heard the term, I've read a little bit about it, but I don't understand it because I haven't looked into it that deeply, mate.
Okay. The essence of it is that when your parents, your mother and father, they basically gift you into the system as collateral, when you registered at birth. When you register, you basically put into the system as collateral. Now, if you want support for that sort of...
Hang on a minute. Just let me understand, right?
Sorry?
You just said something that's totally way out there, right? What you're saying to me is that when you register... I've got 4 kids, right? And every single time we registered one of our kids, or to be, to have a birth certificate. Now, you said that what we actually did is register them as collateral. Now, collateral is my car. Collateral is my house. Collateral is my drum kit. How can my kid or my kids' birth certificate...
This is how disgusting this is. We are all, whether we like it or not, have been registered in as collateral through to the likes of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. Now, for example, if you'd like some substantiation of that claim, you can look at the 1997 executive order signed by Bill Clinton, and within that executive order he spells out the definition of capital to include human capital. And he goes on, this is backed up by another financing statement to the value of $14.3 quadrillion. Now, you won't even see that sort of number on the national GDP or the national debt of the states. They're still talking trillions.
It's not even
here's a financing statement that's got 14.3 quadrillion on there. That's 14 with 15 zeros after it. And the collateral secured is real men with arms and legs, using those words. Now if that doesn't really get you a little bit worried that we're collateral, I don't know what does.
So basically, a financial system, or some of the biggest financial systems in the world, according to what Bill Clinton, through a presidential executive order, he made people an asset of the financial system. So Americans are basically pieces of commodity you can trade.
Yep. Now, when you go in and look at the financing statements from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York over all the assets of the Australian banks, and you start seeing some of the collateral that's secured is something called chattel paper, and you look at the origin of the word chattel, then you start getting back to birth certificates. And don't forget, these Australian banks are buying government securities.
Yep.
We're talking about a situation where the people are just chattel. Now, you notice on your birth certificate, most likely you've got a capitalised name on there.
Yep.
And you'll see on your driver's licence, it's all capitalised. Your bank card, it's all capitalised.
Yes.
When the State Debt Recovery Office or whatever, SPUR, write to you, it's in capitals.
They use my middle name as well.
So they'll do it in various forms. They might do it in lowercase, but they'll put a Mr. or a Mrs. in front. Very rarely will they actually have your name spelled as your mother gave it to you, or appears on your birthday cards.
Yes.
Now, what they've done essentially is they've created a corporate entity, or these trusts. The actual mechanisms of it, I'm not probably the best person to talk to on that. But a number of folk who've done far more research on this. But sufficient to say that we're treated as this collateral. And for whilst ever you've got your birth certificate, that is the starting point for this. You could call it an alter ego, and that whilst ever you have that, any government or bank will want to interact with that alter ego. Courts ask for, are you the person this... first thing the police want to know on the side of the road is, have you got your driver's license? We want to associate you with this little alter ego.
Yeah.
Now,
what do you mean by alter
is a
ego?
creation.
Now, like the name on my license, I got a license so I could legally drive on the road and I'd have insurance. And I know that I've got to keep my license fees up so that I can, have the license that's valid. But what you're saying is that that license is not really mine. It's my birth certificate's license. Is that what you're saying?
Partly. For example, is there anything that says that it's not lawful for you to travel freely within the landmass of Australia?
Well,
that you're aware of?
The good old Jack Dempsey, Minister for Police here in Queensland, has told us all, as we were discussing these anti-hoon laws, that driving is a privilege and it's not a right, because we don't have a Bill of Rights in Australia.
Yeah.
So driving is a privilege.
Yep, exactly. So what they've done is they've said, we have the right and the capability of issuing you privileges. Now, is that a government of the people or is that a control mechanism? Who's wagging the dog here?
Mate, look, honestly, that's one of the things that irks me so bad, that I was in a situation where I lost my license, not for anything dangerous. I adhere to the point system. They've got a point system. Not because, I particularly want to be lawful or legal or whatever, because I simply want to go to where I'm going and come back home to my family, right? And without having lost any points, I miscalculated a payment to the Gold Coast City Council's parking fine of $60 by 3 days. And without knowing the process, they ended up taking that late payment without crossing T's and dotting I's to the state penalties people, and then I got to go to court because they said to me I've lost my license, or actually I was driving suspended, and I got caught by a policeman without me knowing I was suspended. I lost my license for 1 month. Yeah. For 1 month, I could not drive on the road legally. And it caused me no end of financial harm for that particular month to get me from my home to work. And the government did that to me. The Queensland government, took away my right to get to places with my car. Is that right? That's not right.
Yep, exactly. And I guarantee that no one got harmed by your actions other than you as a result of their actions.
I told the policeman on the side of the road, I said to him, I haven't done anything wrong. I said, I wasn't speeding. Why are you pulling me over? He goes, because you're unlicensed and uninsured. Yeah.
Oh, I can see. It's prevalent. The whole thing now is so much about process. And that's the thing. It's the folk that are processing all of the people, they're just pushing buttons and they've got their little report book that says, when this happens, do that. When that happens, do this. They don't care. They're like little hamsters running in the wheel to earn their money, to put bread on the table and to pay their mortgage. So here we go back to the banking. Same thing with the police. They're out there trying to earn money to put bread on the table and pay their mortgage.
That's right. Personally, I know some police people. There's nothing wrong with police people. They're in general, they're nice people. But when they're on the job...
they're just as much affected by this as you and I. And that's the thing that they are unaware of presently. I'm sure they're unaware of this aspect of banking and this corporate government.
Can I just backtrack you a little bit to this straw man birth um, license thing? Now,
Yep.
when they pull me over and ask me for my license, and in
Mhm.
reality, are you telling me that our original constitution gives me the right to travel freely anywhere I want, whenever I want?
I believe that's what the principle of the common law is. Basically, it comes down to do no harm, and there's some massive discussions on this in the States. They really went to town on it, and they came up to the same conclusions that the rights of travel had been replaced by a privilege with the license, and that's what it's boiled down to here. See, part of the aspect comes down to this straw man thing is essentially, whilst ever you're acting as if you're this entity that derives from the birth certificate, you're not acting as the living natural man. And that's the thing that can be really hard to come to grasp with, that there's two yous. There's the living one, and then there's this artificial one. Now,
You know what?
the mechanics
I can
of
see that.
is
I can
Sorry?
see that. I can actually see that right now. Like me personally, in my car that day, was not harming anyone. I was traveling from one spot to another. But when they pulled me over, my offence was administrative. It was my license was cancelled. Not that I did say anything wrong. So someone pulled the trigger somewhere on a computer in relation to the name and address on my license. That is not my actually. It's not my license. The license is the state government's license. I simply
Exactly.
carry it around. I carry around that license. Now the thing is, if I don't carry that license, then they'll get me for driving unlicensed altogether, or not having a license or producing a license.
Yep, exactly.
I tried to talk to some lawyers, right? I tried to get some law advice. I couldn't spend a lot of money, so I did the best amount of money I could spend where I could. But they all said to me, no, you got to conform. Basically, you got to do your stuff. The law is you drove, you didn't pay the fine on time. They did all these things wrong. My only solution that they offered me was to do a submission to the commissioner, basically begging ends and knees to the commissioner of police.
Yep, rather interesting. Just that word alone, submission, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, the submission. Yeah, well, to me, submission meant I was bending over backwards, if you know what I mean. But I wasn't submitting at all. I was there fuming and screaming and ranting.
Oh, yeah.
But they did not see. They did not see that me as a human being was doing anything wrong, and they were going to stuff up my life by taking away my license for 1 month. And they asked me to write it down and give it to them. Now, I knew from that moment they asked me that nothing was going to happen from it, and nothing did happen from it. And then I said the same thing to the judge. I said, this is not right. But he said, my hands are tied. I have to give you a 1 month suspension. He said, I've got the ability, I've got the power to give you a $500 fine. He says, I'm not going to give you a fine. So I didn't feel like he did me a favour, that he didn't fine me. I said to him, give me the fine, I'll give you the money, but give me my freaking license. But all that was wrong. All that is wrong. They can't do that. And if the government is not a legal, constitutional government, they're McDonald's. I don't like McDonald's. I don't buy bloody McDonald's. I don't want to buy any more government. I don't want to buy any more shit they give me, because it's useless.
No.
They do some useful stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Now, that's just under the guise of appearing useful. But I just put a link into the Skype there, a website called servantking.info.
Yes.
This is a Canadian guy, which is working in a system that parallels Australia in terms of it being a sort of so-called Commonwealth nation. Sorry, not nation, colony.
Yes.
And he's got a series of videos on his website. They're fairly lengthy, but he does a really good job of describing the origin of this strawman thing and the things that he went through in going along to the births, deaths and marriages office to find out what was going on with this name on his birth certificate. And it really is an interesting story as he lays it out there. It takes a little while to get through and listen to it, but he does it step by step, logically, and it's just sharing a situation like you did with your license. Mm-hmm. He kept birds, like falcons and hawks and that sort of thing.
Yes.
And one day they changed the law and made it illegal, not unlawful, illegal to have these birds. He's like, I've done this for 25, 30 years, and one day it's all right, and the next day I've got to apply for this license that someone may give me or they may not give me, and I've got to pay them a certain fee.
That's wrong.
So I'd suggest having a look at that website if you want to get a bit more information on what's going on with the birth certificate.
All these websites I'm going to go and investigate, and some of the stuff you told me, mate, honestly has been mind-blowing. You know, it definitely needs to be looked at, but is there anything like that anyone is doing to expose this? And mind you, in the back of my mind, and I did get a question from one of the people, and I think I mentioned it earlier, if we start upsetting some of these people that are making money from all these status quos, are we going to get, or is there going to be repercussions? Have you, like you've made some waves of sorts. Has anyone approached you to stand down, so to speak, or to back off talking to this government? Like, I got to tell you, Scott, I'm not scared of the government. A government, the way I see it, the way I always saw it before I got any way political was, it's the people. And these people are our servants. They're supposed to be.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
Unfortunately, you're right. Exactly. The one thing that we do have in common is we are all people. And I see that you can treat those folk, despite the fact that they're working for companies masquerading as government, you can still treat them as people. And the way I've been focusing on this sort of challenge is I do it by asking questions. I ask them for evidence that they are real government. And some of the questions that I use on, like I've got them on my website, I'm about to update that website and put some more simplified and streamlined stuff up there. But yes, I'd say keep it simple, keep it respectful. You can sometimes make these payments under duress and say, look, I make this under payment. However, I want it made known that if it turns out that your office derived from an unlawful office of governor and you have no standing and authority, then I want to get my money back, mate. So you can get the message across in ways that is respectful and not, I mean, you not pissing them off.
Can I ask you just a more direct question? It's actually quite ironic that I'm talking to you now. I've got one of these toll meters on my windscreen when I go past some of these tolls. Right? Tolls are a different story. I'm not going to start on that. But anyway, in Queensland, we've got a company called Queensland Motorways that collects tolls on the Gateway Bridge. And it's it's around the $4 an hour. But anyway, this one here, I got a letter because my little gizmo mustn't have worked. The little electronic gizmo that takes your toll away. and they said toll due but not paid, $2.52. Right, so this is a demand notice for non-payment of toll. So $2.52,
Right.
but there's administration charge of $21.60, a total of $24.12. Now, this is, as far as I understood it, this is a company that, at some stage the builders of the road said you administer the toll collection, and this particular time it mustn't have gone off, and I got this thing, and $24 for a $2.50 toll. Now it says here that I'm a recorded registered operator of the vehicle, and it quotes an act.
Yep.
It says the Transport Infrastructure Act of '94, Queensland, Chapter 6, Part 7. It tells you you're the operator. Basically, as you are the registered operator of the vehicle at the time of the stated trip, you are remain liable for any penalty imposed unless you arrange for payment for this toll amount. Now, how can a private company do that to me?
They're all private companies, even those ones that are purported governments. The way I've been doing that with those sort of things, private companies that are quoting these acts, is I say, look, I'm happy to pay as long as you can demonstrate that the act that you're talking about was signed by a governor who derived his authority from a lawfully constituted office of governor. Because if your act derived from an unlawful office of governor, then that'd mean you're working with an imposter, and surely the act would not have received real royal assent, and therefore it's unlawful. And for me to participate in that would be aiding and abetting a criminal activity, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. And a lot of companies that I've put something like that to have just gone, whoa, we're out of here.
Really?
And they just leave you alone. Yeah, they write back and say, oh, we got our authority under this and and bluff their way through it, and you go, oh, it didn't work. And really all they've done is just accepted your terms and conditions, and I go off and invoice them. But these guys can get really, really persistent, and it's an admin nightmare if you really go down that route.
Yep.
So it's not an easy thing at all to do this challenge in any shape or form. So I'm looking at ways of which, how can we get this information out? How can we make a challenge in an effective way that's not going to bog us down in admin with guys chasing after us for months on end, cancelling licences, granted they're unlawful licences in the first place, but they do make travel a hell of a lot harder when they go and pull these stunts, cancelling stupid tickets. So, it's not easy.
By the way, I may point out that I'm not a criminal. All these things I've been mentioning, like evading tolls and not paying parking fines and all that sort of stuff. This is over the course of a few years. And
context.
They're getting more prevalent, and I know for a fact I'm not the only one that comes across all these little tiny things from government on a daily basis, which should really not be there in my mind. Why should a $2.50 toll fee turn out to be $24?
No, but let's look at the context of this. Say, for example, you make payment to the ATO, and the ATO turn out to be a company because the two acts that brought the ATO into existence, or that they're reliant upon, were signed by a Governor-General who is operating from a parallel office of Governor-General. Then when you pay that ATO, you're paying an unlawful organisation that's masquerading as government. They're personating Commonwealth officers. You're aiding and abetting them by paying them.
But everyone knows.
At the moment,
sorry, Scott. Everyone knows you pay your taxes, or everyone thinks you've got to pay your taxes. What do they say? Only death and taxes are assured.
Yeah.
If we
that goes banking aspect. Your Income Tax Assessment Act only came in 1936. Now, if your Treasury was printing the money instead of the government, purported government, borrowing it from private banks, then you don't need taxpayers. The Treasury brings the money into existence and spends it into the community, like we said with those roads and bridges and dams.
Mm-hmm.
We've just been conditioned for so long now that we need taxpayers, that you have to pay your taxes, that how else are we going to provide for the infrastructure and roads and all the rest of it? Well, the same way they used to. There's two presidents in the States that did this, Kennedy and Lincoln. Both of them got shot. Wonder why.
Mate, actually, there was a movie recently, Lincoln, and when you were talking about slavery and chattel, it reminded me of that movie about Lincoln, the president of the movie, where he signed the Declaration to free all the African American slaves at the time. But it sounds like the slavery system of different sorts, without the chains that are made of metal, may be back, and we don't know it.
Yep. No.
How do we get out of these chains?
Well, I'd have a look at that website, that Servant King website, and just absorb the information for the moment.
Servant King, no problem. I'll put the link up.
servantking.info.
I'll put the link up on my page.
Yeah. It's not an easy task. It's not an easy feat. And there's been folk who've been studying this for how many years now, trying to figure out how to get out, if you like, from this system. There's some fascinating developments that are going on. This is very interesting news. For example, we've got September the 1st is looking like a rather interesting date. We've got the resignation of Ben Bernanke. We've got Janet Napolitano resigned from Homeland Security in the States as of September the 1st. We've got the Vatican putting out a apostolic letter making judges and various members of the administration of the Vatican liable for criminal prosecution from September the 1st. Will we see more resignations coming up on September the 1st or around then? Maybe.
There's been a spate of resignations from our own political leaders at the moment, the current government, which is yet to announce an election. All the people involved with the previous Prime Minister, or most of the leaders have resigned. I don't know whether they've actively resigned already or picked a date or not. But what does that mean, Scott?
Don't know. I think it's interesting to see it from the perspective of things changing. Big picture, hard to speculate what it really means. It's just sort of more data that may or may not be able to have dots joined between other dots.
Mate, look, if anything, talking to you has made the dots a lot more prevalent. There's more dots to join, and a lot more to find out about that. What you've done is pretty much highlight a reality. There are still some people doubting it, and honestly, I got to tell you, I want to look into it. I'm not saying I don't believe that we don't have a proper constitution and a proper government. I mean, we're surviving. We have got all these pressures on us from different sources. But if there is an original constitution that is no longer valid because of mysterious means, that is not right. If it's true that money is created by an IOU to a bank, and it's basically my money that they've just created from my, and then charge me interest on it. That's something to look at. If it's true that the Commonwealth of Australia is a company, which has other reasons to exist as a company, other than what they state, I believe you were saying, it's so they can trade overseas. That's something we've got to look into. So what I'm probably urging people to do is to have a look at what you've said, Scott, and some of the places you've directed us to have a bit of a look. I believe people have their own brain, most of them, or many of them.
Yep.
And I believe that if they choose to think, they'll find out information. Some of it may be shocking, some of it might be unbelievable, like some of the stuff I found out. But we need to know. How can you decide what to do with your future if you don't know what the all the pieces are? You can't make a move on a chessboard if you don't know where all the other chess pieces are. So, or you can't build an engine. You don't know where your valves will go unless you work out how many cylinders you got.
No, I'd certainly encourage folk to double check this information. What I would suggest is asking those questions about the office of the governor, and there's multiple diagrams on my website that has that one question, and ask it of each individual at government that you deal with. And I would suggest compiling, and if you want to ask this question, compile the results of what responses you get, if you get any responses. And that's what I've done. I've done this now for over 2 years, asking that one question and not one response, other than that governor writing back saying, I'm not going to even answer it.
Can you spell out that question right now for us, if you don't mind?
You want to ask, or well, I would suggest asking, were the original letters patent of 1900 constituting the office of governor of the state of Western Australia and its dependencies in the Commonwealth of Australia, revoked, altered or amended by an heir and successor to the late Queen Victoria in accordance with the full power and authority reserved by her in 1900.
Okay, fair.
You don't want to know whether they were just revoked. You don't want to know whether they were altered. You want to know whether they were revoked, altered or amended in accordance with the power and authority reserved by Queen Victoria.
Okay.
That's my...
Look, Scott, this was only supposed to be a brief chat just to explain what happened with you, and I thank you for the other information you gave us. And I was going to ask you questions about your car. How does it ride, mate? How does it feel driving that car? It's a beautiful machine.
Oh, it's awesome.
Did you get a chance to take it to car shows or anything?
Actually, yeah, I've taken it to the Hot Rod, Western Australian Hot Rod Show, and took out People's Choice Award, and also had it at the 60th anniversary of the Corvette show with the Corvette Club, and took out People's Choice there as well. So it's been received pretty well here in Australia.
It's a beautiful car, mate. I saw one recently, a red one, at the Gold Coast Hot Rod Nationals. And the crowds were like 4 deep all around it. It is a nice car, and it's just got some classic lines to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Scott, look, thank you very much for your time, and I'm pretty sure you've awakened some questions in some people, and there'll be links to some of the websites you've sent to me on my website, and I'll post them on Facebook and all over the place so people can have a look. There has been a bit of interest in finding out what you've got to say, and I'm glad you told me. If anything, it's sparked more questions, which I've got to go and investigate. Thanks again, Scott.
No worries. And, happy to speak to you another time as well.
Excellent. Appreciate that, mate.
The wheels, the people and the road. Music and talk live on CruizeFM.com.au.